Well, it's always been discussed as kind of a far out possibility, an NFL team existing overseas, possibly in London, maybe as well in Germany, or maybe even a full European division to deal with the travel problems. Guys, today I'm going to talk about, is it possible for an NFL team to exist in London, whether it's expansion or relocation? There were rumors, especially like 7 or 8 years ago, about the Jacksonville Jaguars possibly moving to London. They are apparently totally in bed with London right now. The Jaguars will make NFL history this year, playing back-to-back games in London starting on October 1st. So, I mean, if you're a Jaguars fan, that's got to be tough. 2 games starting at 9:30 a.m., but we've seen this time and time again. The NFL normally in October, maybe late September, there's always a London game. They've kind of cut it back recently with just a few games, but there was a time from like 2016 to 2019 where they had 4 London-based games. Now they're both in London and Germany. If you remember back in 2013, 2014, they had a series up in Canada with the Rogers Center. And today I'm just going to be discussing the logistics. How do I think it would actually work out? Would they have to have multiple teams in London? You can see this coming out last year. NFL floats wild idea of possibly putting 4 teams in Europe as part of a major international expansion. So right now, when it comes to NFL expansion, I would say it's at the way back burner. I'm not saying NFL expansion's not going to happen, but if it does happen, probably it'll happen in the late 2020s, as opposed to both MLB and the NBA expanding well before then. NFL right now, it's not at a state to where it will expand. It's also important to note NFL expansion will likely be very different in terms of just how big it is. They're not going to go to a small city or even a mid-sized city. If the NFL expands, you're looking at possibly a place like Toronto, Canada. You're looking at a place like Austin, Texas, or maybe you're looking at a place overseas like London. And when you compare London to other major cities, just to understand why this would work, you think of Europe, they like soccer, not football, or I guess they call it football versus American football, whatever you want to call it. The population is just ridiculous. So you can see London compared to New York City. New York City has not 1 but 2 teams, and London has a bigger population, and American football is growing in London. Apparently, many people overseas are a little annoyed and kind of done with the London games. They want their own team. They're tired of different teams coming there just once a year, and they want an actual franchise. But the idea of putting 4 teams, making your own European wing, it would certainly work when it comes to dealing with the travel, because all of those teams would be facing each other and you would stay in Europe. You could have 1, maybe even 2 teams based out of London, 1 team based out of Germany. I mean, they're already going to Germany as it is. And then maybe 1 team out of Ireland. When it comes to the actual travel, let's first talk about the standalone theory of the Jaguars moving to London and becoming the London Jaguars or whatever, because that was a big thing. There was the idea that the Jaguars owner was going to buy Wembley Stadium. By the way, Wembley Stadium recently did get a pretty big renovation. I think when you look at Wembley Stadium, that is certainly nothing. If an NFL team was building a new stadium, it would not look like that. That is certainly a European soccer model, but it does work for the NFL because they did get a renovation. And then you also have Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which is brand new, opening around 2019. You could really play at either one of those venues and they would be considered, in terms of NFL stadiums, perfectly acceptable, especially Tottenham Hotspur. Wembley kind of looks a little bit older, but still both would be fine for NFL football. You don't look at either of those stadiums and say, oh, they would be in the bottom half. They certainly would not be in the bottom half. Now, are they super stadiums? No, they're not super stadiums like they do them now with the NFL, but they are really good. The idea of just 1 team being located overseas is very hard, but I think this is the NFL and they can actually make it work if you understand the NFL schedule and how they do it. A few weeks ago we had the Hall of Fame game happening I guess you would call it like week 0 of the NFL preseason. And if you're just going to have one team in London, how you would mitigate the travel is you would have the London-based team face the team that they're going to open the season with in the Hall of Fame game, and then they would play week 1 and week 2 of the preseason. They would both be off week 3, and then you guys know we have this in-between period where everyone gets a bye week in between week 3 of the preseason and then week 1 of the regular season. There used to be 4 games in preseason, now there's 3 because they want to mitigate any potential injuries. They just don't think it's useful. I mean, nowadays with preseason, players barely even play anyways, so the idea would be if you play the London-based team or the European-based team in week 0, like the Hall of Fame game week, they could play the week everyone is off against someone, and that would be like the NFL kickoff, and that would give them an extra built-in bye week during the season, so they would have 2 bye weeks, and you would say, well, that gives, them an unfair advantage. But in terms of travel, if it's just one London-based team, or even 2 London-based teams, or European teams, the travel is going to be so bad anyways. You're dealing with a flight from London to New York of about 7.5 hours. The flight going from London is actually not bad at all because of the time change. You're going with the time. So it's like if you leave at 9 a.m. London time, you're going to arrive in New York City at around 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Because of the time change, is like 7 hours. The flight's 7 hours. It works out. The issue is coming back. So what they would have to do if it was just one team, you would have to have a block schedule to where you have 2 built-in bye weeks during the season, because if you play in week 0 or like in between preseason week number 3 and NFL kickoff week 1, if you play in that bye week area, which is the window we're currently in actually, you would have another built-in bye week. You would probably play your first 3 or 4 games at home. You would have a bye week. You go on the road, 3 or 4 games, have another bye week, come back home, 3 or 4 games, go on the road, 3 or 4 games. It's a block schedule. It's like 4 at home, 4 on the road, 4 at... It's not ideal. It doesn't feel really all that competitive to me. I mean, I guess technically a 7-hour flight, it's not like a death sentence, right? But that's actually just going to New York. So it's probably going to be even more going to most cities, probably like 9 or 10 hours if you're going to, like a central time zone like Chicago or a place like that. It is a very tough flight. And that's going to be the big issue. Also, the time change is going to be a big issue if they don't get a bye week. So, I mean, they could make it work, but it's not just about the flight. It is also the idea of being unable to attract free agents because you're at a competitive disadvantage in terms of your location. The Toronto Raptors have had a similar issue where, I mean, they're just in Canada, but because of the whole idea of not being in the United States, it is annoying to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The Toronto Raptors have had some problems attracting free agents, and this could be like, it could be on steroids if they just put one team in Europe, because nobody wants to deal with that. Even if you're talking about the London team offering a player like $5 million more, would it even be worth it? If they're offering like $75 million, another team in America is offering $70 million, you'd be tempted to just go. I mean, I guess depending on taxes and things like that, that's another thing they would have to logistically work out that I feel like would be a nightmare, but it could get done for sure. The NFL is a multi-billion-dollar league. And they could certainly do something like this. It would just be really hard. And that's the whole idea of building your own, European league. It does seem far-fetched. It does seem kind of ridiculous. It just depends. Is the money there? I mean, certainly the population is there. Is the popularity of American football in Europe to the point where the NFL would change their league significantly to placate to possibly a massive European expansion? And then if they do go with their own European division, you would have those teams face each other. If it's 4 different teams, that would be like 6 games within Europe because they'd all have home and homes in their same division, and the travel would be a lot easier. The question is, would the NFL actually expand by 4 more teams, or would it be 2 teams possibly relocating to Europe and then 2 more expansion teams just existing in Europe? I don't really know. The Jaguars were the one team that everyone thought or at least some people thought, was going to go to London and relocate because of the owner possibly buying Wembley Stadium. And, it's come out now that the Jaguars, they're in a much better place. They've got a franchise quarterback with Trevor Lawrence. They've got a lot of hype around that team. They just announced their massive Stadium of the Future, which is a total stadium rebuild with a translucent roof that's going to cost a total of $2 billion. I do have some skepticism on if that's actually going to happen, if I'm going to be completely honest. You have to look at the finances with Jacksonville. The owner has come out and said he wants to pay half of it. So they're going to have to get $1 billion from taxpayers. That's not going to be an easy feat, especially for Jacksonville. So I think that's going to be happening. I mean, they've drawn up all the renderings. It's all been announced. It's just the funding, right? It's not like this is guaranteed. Oh, it's set in stone. They're going to break ground. They're talking about it. We got to get the funding, $2 billion. Half of it's paid privately, half of it's publicly. We don't know if it's going to happen. But you would say if they've gone this far, they have to have some confidence level in this actually being funded. And if Jacksonville gets that Stadium of the Future, they're obviously not going to be moving to London. Another reason why they were one of the teams that was kind of thought of as possibly going is because of their horrible stadium right now. I mean, they're going to be playing at it the next 3 or 4 years. It's one of the worst in the NFL, and it's only going to be lower and lower on the list as Nissan Stadium leaves the picture because the Titans are getting a new stadium. Same thing with the old Highmark Stadium. The Bills are getting a new one in 2026. So right now, I would say the chances of London getting a team, just because it's a logistical nightmare, are very slim to none. This is a money thing, and you can understand that, yes, if you just want to look at, I mean, think about Europe getting their own team and the amount of merchandise you can sell with all of that. It is so impressive. It's like, how much does the NFL want to sacrifice competitiveness, because that team's going to have so many disadvantages if it's just one team in London? I mean, you could, I guess, put another team out there. That's 2 games. They wouldn't have to leave, but it would still be bad in terms of travel because they would be going back to the States, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, even if you put another team out there. That's why I think they floated the idea of having their own European division. It's kind of like college football with expansion. When the Big Ten, it's a much smaller level for sure because it's only like a 3-hour flight, but it's the idea of the Big Ten creating a West Wing to mitigate the travel concerns of USC and UCLA. So they add in Washington and Oregon, and maybe they'll end up adding more teams down the line. But the more teams you add, all those teams can face each other. It's less trips to the East Coast. It's less 4 or 5 hours flights. It's less dealing with time change and jet lag, and it balances the divisions more. And that would be the idea of making an entire international division out in Europe. I will say a big advantage that a potential, London-based team will have, they've already got the stadium. I mean, they've got Wembley, they've got Hotspur. Both are very impressive. Both are billion-dollar stadiums. When it comes to expansion, that is one of the most pressing issues. How are you going to build your stadium? How are you going to fund it? Where's it going? They've already gotten that taken care of. I don't really know if there would be a conflict when it comes to the soccer games that are happening in London, possibly at that time. Maybe there could be, but you could also play games at both. If you have just one London team, there's multiple stadiums there that you could play games at. So the stadium would not be a problem, and that could be a big advantage in terms of them getting a team. But I don't see any of this happening, probably at the earliest in the 2030s, just because it doesn't seem like the NFL wants to expand. And no matter where the NFL goes, like if they stay in the States and Austin, Texas gets a team, or they go to Canada and do a Canadian expansion and give Toronto a team, you're going to need new stadiums. So it's going to be a very long process when it comes to getting these teams stadiums, getting them into the league, and things like that. That's just my opinion on London or Europe possibly getting an NFL team. It is very hard to make work logistically. I mean, could they make it happen? Of course they could if they're that obsessed with the money, but it would be a massive disadvantage for the single team that is in Europe. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.